All right. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Product Management Book Club. And this time we are starting a brand new book. We are starting Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perry. And we just came off another book where Melissa Perry was one of the co-authors. Really liked that, a deep dive into product operations. And during that, we found that they were mentioning Escaping the Build Trap a lot. So we wanted to take a step back and start off with this book, which is promising to kind of go back to the origins of product management and how it helps organizations escape what the author's calling the build trap, which we understand to be that cycle where a company is building a whole lot of things that aren't necessarily helpful to users and they're not achieving their goals. And I think that this is something that we see across a lot of different companies and, key to the title are stuck in that trap, really hard to get out. And so, hopefully, in this book, we'll find some tips and tricks for getting out of the trap, not getting to the trap in the first place, and kind of understand what makes that up. So, I'm super excited to get started today.
Yes, and all of that is good, and it also gives us a feel as to where Miss Melissa came from, because she moved into operations from, this kind of humble beginning, so to speak,
Yeah.
and partnering with subject matter expert number two.
Hmm.
So, yeah, you could see here she says it's a trap because we might get stuck in outputs versus outcomes. And
Hmm.
so yeah, it is good for us to get our minds around the product side of it a little bit more, particularly from her perspective. And as you say, kind of going back a little and saying, all right, well, product operations, very amazing. I can see how dynamic it is, especially for an enterprise.
Yeah.
But how did you get, like, where did you come from to like evolve to this way of thinking? So yeah, we get to dig into that a little bit and see where her foundation, her seeds got planted, so to speak.
Yeah, and I like that idea, like you were talking about product ops and how that evolves. And I think in this, at least, we'll talk about this more reading through the chapter, but it sounds like, you come upon an organization in trouble that's kind of stuck, like you said, in this output frame of mind. And so first you have to, fix the build trap. You have to make this a product-led organization. And then after it's a product-led organization, then once you start to scale, then you start looking into product ops. So how can we take this product management culture and function and apply it to a rapidly growing organization? That's at least kind of my take on the timeline.
Yeah, let's see where she's coming from here.
Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump right into the preface, I think. And one of the things that stood out to me in this first quote, actually from Michael Dell, was we needed to know more about our customers and what problems they were really trying to solve in their business, even if it didn't fit neatly into an existing category of ours. And I think, obviously that's something that's key that we've talked about in product management before, but we'll see as a theme in here is needing to know more about the customers. A lot of
Hmm.
times we distill customers down into a very basic profile and we just kind of run with that. And I think part
Yeah,
of this is also, realizing that people are three-dimensional and sometimes we're not capturing all of the picture.
yeah. That speaks to the build trap mentality too. It's interesting they start with that, with the, being the subject what it is, because to your point, if we're just building something because we believe that, we think this is what the customer wants, or we feel it's what they want, but we never really get the voice of the customer. That's
Hmm.
a very important component missing from the equation, right? We like want to deliver a product or service or a result that's going to meet your needs. How do we do that without hearing from you first, right? So it's an interesting perspective to come from. A good one.
Yeah, definitely. And I think another quote that stuck out in this section, so you're talking about, building the product and not knowing necessarily what the customer needs. And, there's knowing that we don't know what the customer needs, and then there's also existing in this kind of reality where we're not getting that feedback. And so, right here, Perry's talking about, being a product manager, shipping all of these features, working with developers and stuff like that. And then she said, a much needed dose of reality was thrown in my face when we began measuring the success of our products. I soon learned that
Mm,
my products were crap and no one was using them. And like, what a
an
kind of a,
awakening.
yeah, yeah. And even just kind of like more casual language than you would usually find in the average product book, but I think really speaks to the part that, the whole product machine runs really smoothly and stuff like that until at some point you're measuring and you're realizing that we're not even achieving our goals, right? Like you said, very
Yeah.
output focused.
And the other thing too is, we can get so mechanical about it because there are steps to product management. And as you say, she's, writing her requirements document. So it's like, yes, I'm being a product manager. That's what product managers do. And
Mhm.
doing all of these mechanical things that, the book, so to speak, says you should do. And she says, frankly, I'm thinking I'm the bomb because she's checking all those boxes off,
Yeah.
the how to, product management 101, 102, 103. But when you look at the results, you're not getting those results. And so that really is the metric that we have to go by. And until she looked at that metric, she was deceived because those boxes were getting checked off, but not getting the results. So are you really checking the boxes? Right. I mean,
Yeah, and I think what you just said there is one of the key points from this section is that you can't look at this just as one person and measure this just as one person, that it's the entire organization that falls into this trap. So if the organization is measuring you by those standards and everyone is in the same trap, then you can see everything from this perspective and think you're doing well because the company is telling you you're doing well, but as a
yeah,
whole, you're stuck in here. And I
you're
think,
stuck.
yeah, and to me, that's kind of why, because in a lot of previous books, it talked about, making sure that you're measuring the right things and knowing when you're off. But it kind of spoke to being an individual and being able to realize, like, oh, this isn't going in the direction that we want it to. And I think this is one of the first places that I've seen where it identifies, like, this can be happening way outside of your scope. Like the entire
Hmm.
company can be oriented this way. That's why you can still be making progress. Like in your org, everyone can say, like, you're meeting your metrics, you're doing really well, and you can still feel like something's stuck. Because
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know about you, Michael, but I've definitely had that feeling at times where it's like, I'm checking off the boxes, everyone says we're doing well, and it's like, something something is definitely stuck. Like I can't put my
yeah.
finger on it, but I can see like the symptoms, but we're not necessarily measuring them, so we don't necessarily know what it is.
Right. Can't get my finger on it, but something's not quite right here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, actually, I'll save that thought for the next section, but,
Well, but as you move in, which she says as she starts rethinking this, she says, "Well, I want to get better. We got to do something different, get some better results."
mhm,
Experimentation.
mhm,
So, in a lot of the cultures, we have a culture that we fear failure,
yeah,
and not that you aspire to fail, but it also takes away from that creativity and that experimental approach, which
mhm,
is where you really learn. Because a lot of times the assumptions that we go into it with, just like she did, as she was checking those boxes off and nice and neatly moving down the pathway. But how do you know it's working, that you're going to get those results? And a lot of times companies are like, let's just do it the way we've been doing it. We don't want to risk something going wrong or
mhm,
breaking the process, whatever it is. And so we don't create that culture of experimentation. But when she took stock of those results and weren't getting that metric, that wasn't being satisfied, it wasn't meeting the customer need, and pivoted, experimentation now became a part of the way she approached this, right? So that's interesting. And of course, data driven. So that's a
yeah,
metric, that customer feedback. So data driven, experimentation, a little bit of trial and error, and to put that into the mix.
yeah, and I think something that stuck out to me there is that, realizing that as part of the organization and stuff like that, and realizing, like you said, that you're not paying attention to the right data, like you're trying to be data driven, um, but the team isn't necessarily, and then getting into that part of it where you're saying, okay, I know that something needs to change, but you yourself maybe can't bring that change
That's
into
right.
action because it's like, I think this is really well explained when we actually start the part 1 with the build trap, is they're talking about the you're talking to someone at every level and everyone's frustrated, but they feel like they can't change it. And then even once you get to the top of the organization, like senior leadership, I mean, they're beholden to stakeholders. And if you tell them we need to like turn this entire organization around to be product led, like where do you even start? Like everyone feels kind of like hamstringed by this idea and like this change and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've run into that a lot in enterprises. When you're doing agile transformations, a lot of times it's based on these same type principles. And organizations, nobody wants to be the person that made that press the wrong button.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if you don't have a culture of experimentation, then you're the bad person if you do that. And so one of the biggest things about changing mindset in a product management is they're looking here, which is kind of an agile approach, to be honest with you, when we start going through, is to get an environment there, kind of a safe environment, we call it. And that is difficult to change because people are comfortable, right? Nobody wants to
Yeah.
do the wrong thing. They just want to stay there for as long as they can, collect a check, and not rock that boat.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about product, there are a few more dynamics that need to be factored in, and sometimes you got to come out of the comfort zone. But as you say, you're in this entity with a number of people, and you got to kind of move with the wave. Like you can't rock the boat by yourself, or at least
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable to do so. But that's exactly what needs to happen a lot of times in these situations.
Yeah, and I really liked what you pointed out about the safe zone because I think that there's a section on page 5 where the higher up manager says like, why aren't people pushing back on this? If we know that this is the problem, why haven't people said anything? And the author says your company is not set up for that type of feedback, which I thought was just an outstanding comment in that like even if people can give feedback, they tell your manager if, there needs to be a change or something like that. Like you said, the fear of losing your job or being wrong or upsetting the boat, like if that type of feedback isn't rewarded and acted but like even the fact that you can do it, that might mean nothing.
Right. Right. Yeah, rewarded definitely is, and it's interesting you say that because I can remember one very large organization we were doing a transformation in, and we were having these sprint meetings, and that was exactly what the problem was, is that they just weren't accustomed to doing it. So it was tough to get them to kind of shift their thinking.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that we see in here that I think we've seen with a lot of the books we've read is the different departments, um, all kind of having a different idea of what's going on and a different idea of what needs to happen. Where, sales is frustrated because of this reason, product is frustrated because of this reason, engineering is frustrated. And I think they point out here like every department is pointing at another department, but nobody's really at fault. They're just all kind of interlocked, and it reminds me of kind of one of those puzzles where you have to extract a piece, and all the pieces will move a little bit, but it seems like there's a piece that you have to unlock first. And to me, that seems like this, where each piece can move a little bit, but they're all waiting for something else to turn. And it's really difficult to determine what that thing is, and everyone's kind of looking at everyone else to start the change. Um, so definitely see how this is challenging and definitely relatable, I think, with looking at so many companies and understanding why you can end up in this pattern of
So what do you do? What
problems.
do you do in that circumstance? Have you, when you find yourself there or found yourself there, what technique have you used to try to break that cycle?
Yeah, and to be honest, like I don't know that I found a super great way to do it. I think that generally, my approach has been, um, like you said, data driven, bringing some data to the table and showing here's what we're doing, here's the consequences of that, here's what we need to be doing. And I will say that a lot of times, it's met with, that's not the goal that the stakeholders are achieving, or that doesn't align with the business goal and stuff like that. And so it doesn't align with their vision and their roadmap, and most of the times it doesn't get done. And so I've run into the bill trap several times.
Yeah, and in large organizations, I find it's a lot more difficult. And so now the thought of the operations makes comes into play because the complexities come in, and now you got to try to figure out another way to do that. But in small organizations, I've found a little bit more successful doing it because they're not as scared of the bureaucracy and I guess the backlash that can happen if you upset
Yeah.
somebody up the chain of command. Because usually in these situations, it's very top down.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
there's not a lot of flexibility in a lot of these organizations for a whole lot of dialogue outside of the directive that's been kind of the order that's been given, and so it does make it a little bit difficult.
Absolutely. And I think that whole idea you were mentioning earlier about people being comfortable and being set. And I think in order to affect change, you have to really feel the pain point, which is why I think in a lot of the organizations that the author is mentioning here, they've gotten to a point where they feel like the company might go out of business otherwise. And that's why they're willing to really change something, move something around. But I think a lot of companies that are underperforming, but they're still satisfying stakeholders. They're still, meeting whatever requirements. Like they're kind of content to keep going as is because nobody wants to risk it, and they don't really feel that pressure to at this point. Which makes a whole lot of sense when you think about it. So yeah, I think that that section really connects a lot of ideas that we already had
Yeah,
about
we may
product.
see some things change in these times because with AI and some of the new products that are coming out, companies are going to have to be a lot more agile.
Hmm.
So that may be changing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's actually a good segue into um, this next section on value and what the difference kind of between business value and customer value. Um, and so, a quick segue from that, the last section said um, it's not about just like the outputs, it's about changing the way that you've always done things. And the business confusing output with actual value. And this idea of what creates value for the customer is solving problems. One of those key tenets of product management that we talk about a lot. Um, and the fact that we can't just build for the sake of building or build because it makes business sense. Like maybe we can build something and it has a really great profit margin, but it doesn't really solve a problem for people. So we know that adoption's probably not going to be great. And I think you can see in a lot of places that people just keep prioritizing that business value versus that real value to users. And that's where we start kind of getting into this snowball effect of
Yeah.
missing customer value.
Yeah, and that's exactly what she parlays into with that value exchange system conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we drive it and base it on value, and now that you say that, that is one of the triggers that I found has been somewhat successful in those transformation, those difficult conversations when it can center around value. And the most important value, as Michael Dell's little note there earlier on, is the customer. Because
Yeah.
I think organizations do feel that they are value driven a lot of times when these decisions are being made,
Mm-hmm.
but which values? And a lot of times it revolves around organizational values or hierarchical, values, or wherever this data may be coming from. Frequently, the customer metric is not emphasized enough. And if we can build a conversation around value with the customer metric being kind of the center, and many organizations understand that because, after all, that's who you're building this product or service or solution for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one other side to the value that the customer sees. So they talk a little bit about competitors and like playing catch up. So that whole like, your competitor releases this feature that allows you to, use AI and create a chatbot, for your company or something. And then, you're like, oh, we have to have that to keep up with our competitors. Um, I've definitely seen that happen. And I think in that case, we take that perceived value for the customer and we let it run over the value we're already creating. Like maybe the reason why people like our product over our competitors is that we offer really good customer service. And then we switch all these resources into developing this new AI chatbot and our customer service goes down because we're not pouring as much into that anymore and then people start to switch. So it's like the whole idea of value and like how we perceive it versus how um customers are perceiving it and is assigning value. I think it's just really interesting like conversation.
It is. It is. And customer centricity is definitely a good thing to hang your hat on, I think, if you're going to go any direction, because that's the end result, right?
Yeah. And I have to hand it to Slack. I don't know if you've ever gotten one of their like user surveys, but I received one of those like a month ago or something, and it went through a lot of questions that I've seen in like different product management books, and one of them was like, if Slack were removed tomorrow, how would you feel as a user? And it's like,
Mm.
like fine, I use other tools, I can substitute them for Slack. It's like sad because like Slack made it better, or like devastated because Slack is an integral part of my day-to-day working. And for me, I picked devastated because I was like, I use Slack for everything. And
Right.
they talk about that being, like a really good metric for how valuable is your product for users. So that just made me think about this. Like, one, they've obviously done an excellent job with their product to get users to that point, but also clearly they're continuously evaluating this. Like, by all means, Slack is a successful company that's got good revenue and things like that, but they're also still obviously talking to their users a lot and keeping tags on those metrics that have perceived value and also business value.
And that's a good one. I never. So, would that be something they're using for their net promoter score metric? You think, or? But that's a good question that they ask.
Yeah, that actually, I wonder if they probably don't make that public, but yeah, I would imagine. I think there was a score on there about yeah, how would you recommend this to someone? I think that feeds into NPS, right? Um,
Yeah, could be on their internal metrics, but that is a really good question. And you're right. I don't not many organizations. I don't think I've gotten a survey like that from any other company before.
yeah, yeah, and then
Really slow in there.
right, and then you think about it, and then you're like, why not? Like, think about how many products we use on a regular basis, and sometimes we'll get an email about, oh, you received this object you ordered on Amazon, please rate it. But how many companies reach out to us and ask like how satisfied we are with the product?
Very few. I don't think I've heard. I mean, I've seen some satisfaction things where you get the stars or the thumbs up, and
Yeah,
one out of five. But the would you be sad if this product went away? Would you not care? Would you use some other competitor? That's kind of a different way of getting that data.
yeah,
And I think it's a little bit more insightful, and also gets the customer to think about it a little bit too, right? It's kind of like, how would I feel?
yeah. Because I'll be honest, after filling that out, I was like, wow, I really do use Slack a lot. Like, so yeah.
Got you thinking about it.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, that was I really like the conversation on value, and then they continue in the second section about the constraints on the value exchange system. And
Mhm,
the first thing that really stuck out to me here was your customers and users don't exist in a vacuum, and so their wants and needs change according to what's around them.
mhm,
And in every analysis that I've done, their wants and needs are always treated as static. So I thought it was really interesting here that she puts the conversation on a dynamic level because it just does change, right? Like if another company launches and is very similar to Slack and they advertise a lot and things like that, if some of my needs are being fulfilled by another tool, that's going to change how I use my existing tool. So yeah, really interesting, and I'm glad that she brought that up because I don't think we think about that enough.
yeah. And another thing, in terms of the customer not being in a vacuum, so the tools are part of that ecosystem. That's
Hmm.
not just static, but they also talk about the communities that the customer interfaces with, including families and friends.
Hmm.
And I don't know of many, when that's thought of from a product standpoint, right? You kind of do the
Yeah.
user, the persona of the customer, and what their profile and demographic and that kind of thing is the target. But the influences of that target. Very strong point they make here, because you might actually feel like Slack's fine, and a couple of your buddies say, well, have you tried Discord? And you're probably not a Discord person. You already said you like Slack, but if you get 4 or 5 of your buddies saying Discord, who you interact with, or some of your coworkers, you might start swaying a little bit because of those people.
Mhm.
And that's something I don't think that we consider much when we think about the customer.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, to their arguments, stuff like that, they're talking about value. So if we were a company measuring the value, if we were just measuring the output, like, even if we just measured, like, number of active users or something like that, like, we'd still be using, if we're, talking about Slack, Discord here, we'd still be using Slack, but it could be that if we start to have a lot more of our conversations on Discord, we start hosting more events on Discord and things like that, if we just measured output, we wouldn't know that our users are migrating. But if we're tracking the value and we're talking to them, and then our answer changes, like we said, from I would be dismayed that Slack was removed versus like I'd be disappointed, but now we're doing a lot on Discord. So like, yeah, you'd start to see that really important, fluctuation in your user base. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's a good. I like that.
E-
That's
Excellent considerations. So, in other words, the customer is not in a vacuum at all, right? There's other factors to consider,
yeah, absolutely.
other influences.
Yeah. And so I know we talked about kind of cutting this book up into smaller chunks so we can really dive into each section. So that's the end of, halfway through part one. And I think, going back to your very last point, some of the important things from this section were customers don't exist in a vacuum. Just because you can build something doesn't mean you should. And many companies are prioritizing the output over the actual value that's delivered to a customer, and especially the value as the customer sees it. And that leads them into a situation that the author is, rightfully calling a build trap. Um, and yeah, I think we can see the
Yeah, not enough
normally.
on the outcomes
Hmm.
and too much on the outputs.
Yeah.
And that is so true. Many organizations are just like, let's do it, let's do it, let's pump it out the door. Make sure you're doing it the right way, you're following policy, procedure, protocol. But at the end of it, now you have this product or service or result that you've created, and doing all the right things. As Melissa
Yeah.
said earlier, she thought she was the bomb,
Hmm.
and because she was following protocol. And how many times do we do that? And that you almost get in many organizations, that is the trap too. You get stuck because that's where the reward. It brings to mind one organization that actually wanted to stick with kind of a business as usual way of doing things when a transformation was occurring,
Hmm.
because we had to examine a reward and recognition system,
Yeah.
because we had made it clear in a few meetings that to be a little bit more agile and cross-functional was going to be more productive, but
Yeah.
they just were sticking to business as usual. And then as we started interrogating, in one of the meetings, they said, well, Joe did X, Y, and Z, and so he's going to get the star of the week.
Yeah.
They had whatever it was they did every week. Somebody got in every area got a boy type of thing,
Hmm.
and it was based on the business as usual metrics. So of
Mm.
course, everybody wanted to win the gold star, and it wasn't really realized that that was the driver as to why people resisted change. Is that the gold star was based on the old metrics,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they couldn't get away from that until we said, wait a minute, maybe we need to look at this reward system, this reward recognition system, because that's the trap right now. Like, everybody's going for that reward, and it's based on these metrics that we're trying to get away from. So how
Yeah.
do you get away from them?
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I feel like that's rarely talked about. Like we talk about organizations being misaligned and, senior leadership executives needing to make sure that, goals roll down accordingly, but specifically on the like rewards and incentives section, I don't
Yeah.
think that's talked about very much that if those are misaligned, like people literally aren't incentivized to go in the right direction.
They are incentivized to go completely out, and that was really an awakening, because we went for months without even considering that. And everybody was agreeing that, there need to be some changes in processes and some transformations needed to occur. And they were following protocol. They were checking off the boxes, just like Melissa here. We said, okay, well, here's the roadmap. These are the steps, all of these steps. Everybody's doing it. We weren't getting those outcomes. They
Yeah.
were reverting back to business as usual. We said, well, everybody agrees that we need to do a transformation. We're doing all the ceremonies, we're following all the protocol. Why is this transformation not occurring? Why do we keep reverting back
Yeah.
the old way? And I think what it was in this particular case is some of the way the requirements were being gathered by the business analyst type people,
Mhm.
and they were going to decision makers to get their metrics, the people that signed off on the budget.
Mm.
So here
Okay.
we are trying to build something out that affected an end user,
Mhm.
but the persons that were being talked to, or feedback was gotten from, were the budget approvers who were not
Mm.
the end users. So we're
Gotcha.
saying, well, why we what's happening? I thought we needed to get feedback from these end users, end user, end user, end user. Yep, but we're trying to please that person that's signing the check,
Yeah.
because that's what we get based on if we make that person happy.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, okay, now I get it. We
Yeah.
got to change that incentive around.
Yeah. Definitely, I think I've identified a key part of the equation there.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, they're not in a vacuum. Absolutely not. I like that one. And I guess the point there is that there's so many elements to that being outside the vacuum. It
Mhm.
doesn't just mean that the division that you work for, or your role, or your subject matter area of expertise. There are these other factors that are influences as
Mhm.
to what our decision making and the culture that we create to get out of that trap uh, are influenced by, and the customer is influenced by. It's not just directly that one individual. It's so many other things that surround and influence that individual that we might need to take into consideration.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think we can extend that, say like no one at your company, no customers, no one part of the process is in a vacuum. Everything is part of the network and the system.
Interesting. Good to bring that to the forefront of the thinking.
Yeah.
All right. I got a lot out of that alone.
Yeah, I know, me too. So, yeah, I think we have a lot to look forward to in the rest of part one. We've got projects versus products versus services. Um, Interesting and age-old discussion, I think, at least projects versus products. Then the product-led organization and what we know and what we don't. Um, so yeah, really excited to get into that section next.
Okay, we'll be ready for that one. Yeah, and it's really great timing too, because I've mentioned to you, we're doing these AI products,
Mhm,
and a lot of this thinking comes into play. Although I would say that in a lot of the new technology, you have a little less of the trap thinking, because it's moving so quick
mhm.
that folks are trying to be first. And so
Yeah.
you're like, what do we need to do? And some other things are getting missed in that, I will say. But if people, are trying to be a little bit more, agile and I guess experimental in this emerging technology moment of time.
Yeah.
Organizations, though, I think is where a lot of this still resides, because they're so big and so steeped into
Yes.
doing business the way they've always done it, that you have it's like trying to locomotive full steam ahead. When you
Yes.
stop it, it just doesn't stop right away, does it?
Yeah. Yeah, so very interested to see if there's, some tips and tricks for that later on in the book, maybe.
All right, we'll see.
Alright. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Customer value.